Zionist Israel screamed first. Not the opening anyone expected, but that's how this confrontation began. A war Tel Aviv thought would be swift and surgical instead turned into a geopolitical masterclass in endurance, deterrence, and surprisingly for the West, Iranian national unity. This was not just a military skirmish. It was the boiling point of a long, simmering standoff, the kind Iran has been preparing for since 1979. Zionist Israel, banking on weakened Iranian allies and internal dissent, launched what it believed would be a decapitating strike. But instead of collapse, Tehran responded with precision, patience, and a show of cohesion that even its most cynical observers couldn't ignore. In a stunning reversal of roles, what lying Western mainstream media called a fractured Islamic Republic watched its opposition put down the megaphones and pick up the Iranian flag. Artists, dissidents, reformists, voices long critical of the Iranian institutions didn't just go quiet, they rallied. They reminded the world and themselves that when a nation is under attack, arguments are paused. The homeland comes first. Even Reza Kianian, the celebrated actor and longtime critic, declared Iran was, is, and will be. That sentiment echoed across Tehran's neighborhoods, not with slogans of ideology, but cries of identity, of survival, of sovereignty. And what about Zionist Israel's objectives? To crush the missile program? Tehran ended the war by raining missiles on stolen Palestinian land. To destroy the nuclear infrastructure? Washington's rush back to the negotiating table says otherwise. To fracture Iran from within? It may have done the opposite. This war didn't just fail to break Iran, it cemented a new understanding. The Islamic Republic is not a regime clinging to power in isolation. It is a state with a nation behind it. A nation that even when it bickers and battles within, will not allow its fate to be dictated from abroad. Zionist Israel expected a divided house. What it found was a house fortified by the very strike it launched. As leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei put it, in the critical moment, the voice of the nation was heard. And that voice, loud, clear, and resoundingly defiant, Iran stood tall. Zionist Israel blinked. And the region, once again, recalibrates. Welcome to the Mideast Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. In today's first segment, we examine how Zionist Israel's calculated assault on Iran backfired into a moment of unexpected national cohesion. What was meant to shatter the Islamic Republic only strengthened it, uniting critics and loyalists under one banner of defiance and survival. From missiles to messaging, Iran didn't just endure, it redefined the battlefield. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Dr. Mohammad Hassan Suwaidani, strategic studies researcher, a writer for different media platforms, and the author of several studies in the field of international relations. A pleasure having you with us, Dr. Suwaidan. Now, in light of the recent confrontation, how do you assess Iran's ability to transform internal vulnerability into national cohesion, particularly when even regime critics stood by the state during Zionist Israel's assault? What does this really say about the failure of Tel Aviv's psychological and maybe strategic calculations regarding Iranian society?
Exactly. When we speak about what happened during the last war, it's obvious that Israel miscalculated its steps. Because, it's obvious that because of this miscalculation, Israel didn't read right the national identity of Iran. Iran holds a huge historical depth, and at the same time, Iran today reflects an Islamic revolution. So when you combine a huge historic depth, which has an imperial history, with the Islamic revolution's history from 1979 till now, then you get a national identity that may never accept being hit, that may never accept imperialism, that may never accept being attacked. That's why at a certain point, whatever happens in Iran, all the people of Iran just combine with the regime, and that's what Israel miscalculated. And we can see that obvious because at the first day of the attacks, Netanyahu spoke with the Iranian people and he asked them to move against the regime.
It was such a ridiculous move.
Yes.
Him telling my friends, the Iranian people, what friends? You were bombing them just minutes ago.
Exactly, and I think that's mainly because Netanyahu has never been in a war with a civilization. He has always been in a war with groups or with countries that
factions.
resistance factions that are in countries that were created in the current year or in previous years, not long ago. Whereas this war was his first war with a civilization that goes back to history a lot. That's why he misread the national identity of Iran, and that's why his psychological warfare didn't work.
Well, given that Iran responded to the Israeli entity's aggression with a calibrated but direct missile strike inside Israeli entity-occupied territories, all while preserving its key nuclear program and the missile assets, how does this really redefine the balance of deterrence in the region, especially concerning U.S. and Israeli entity efforts to isolate or even cripple Iran militarily? How do you see that happening at the moment?
I think we have here two things to speak about. First, Israel, then the U.S. Let me start with the U.S. because whatever narrative you have regarding when Iran hit the American base in Qatar, it's always all the narratives gives Iran leverage, because some try to give less importance for this hit by saying that, well, it was something that Iran told the U.S. before about. But even in this narrative, which tried only to undermine Iran, even with this narrative, it means that the U.S. had to accept being hit in the region, in one of its biggest military bases in the region, without being able to do anything. So first of all, even with the worst narrative, with the American narrative, Iran has a leverage, and the U.S. had to accept being hit, even if they knew it before, and they couldn't cancel the hit. As for Israel, it's also obvious that Israel couldn't bear to stay in a war for a long time, because this war would have changed to a war of attrition, and that's what Israelis were being afraid, because they can enter with a war on a war of attrition with some resistance groups, because the costs may be bearable for Israel. But with Iran, it's different. Iran is a regional power. Iran can hit Tel Aviv every day, and that's too much different than what Israel has been used to. So regarding how Iran's strategy was regarding the U.S. or Israel, it showed leverage with the U.S., it showed leverage with Israel, and that's why when the war ended, when Trump announced the ceasefire that it should start, the last one who hit was Iran, and all the goals of the war, which were mainly three: the nuclear program, the missile program, and changing the regime, they were failed, and even they couldn't achieve going towards a deal at the end of the war, because every war ends with a deal. When you fail to enter a deal that serves your interests, means what you started failed, and means that all the costs you bared didn't give you the benefits you wanted to. So yes, Iran's strategy was perfect. It had leverage with the U.S., it had leverage with Israel, and that's why after the war, now we can speak about deterrence. Now we can speak about a regional power that proved for everyone that it can act and it can cause huge costs to the enemies.
Even we can speak about having all the options on the table open against the interests of Zionist Israel, maybe in the first time ever happening in West Asia. Do you think that's the case here?
Of course, it's not only about that. Israel is very good about changing narratives, about hiding information. If you see what's happening inside of Israel today we have a huge amount of people that are answering in surveys that they don't believe Israel is a safe entity anymore. And let's remember here that when Israel was created, it was created for one or two main reasons. Number one, it is a safe entity for Jews around the world, to convince them to come here. And number two, it reflects Western interests. Well, now, because after the war, Iran proved that Israel is never a safe entity. So the first reason for creating it has been vanished. And number two, Israel has also proved for itself and for the West that it's very costly to support it to reflect Western interests. So these are one of of the two main main results of the last war. Israel proved that the two reasons that created it may no more be found today.
And added to that, with the collapse of Zionist Israel's strategy to provoke internal dissent inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the emergence of what many call a national awakening around sovereignty and survival, how should we understand this long-term implications of the 12-day war on future negotiations, if they ever happen, obviously, especially regarding Iran's missile program and its stance towards nuclear ambiguity? They have every right now to be ambiguous about their nuclear program.
I think on the long term or on the medium term, everyone will see that Israel did a huge mistake with the attack. Because before there was some differences inside of Iran, maybe a huge number of people didn't support every decision the regime takes regarding the nuclear program, regarding negotiations, and even regarding Iran's foreign policy and its support for resistance groups in the region. Now, all the people, no, you don't have opposition and people who are with the regime. Now you have Iran. Now you have Iranians. Now all of Iranians are convinced that in order to protect Iran, Iran should continue supporting resistance groups. Iran should continue proliferating a nuclear program. Iran should continue having ballistic missiles. Now this thing is no more divided upon, because Israel showed them that without being strong, without having strong allies, what would happen to Iranian people. And that's why Israel seems to have been created a huge strategic mistake. It used to have before differences between Iranian people. Now you have national unity around Iranian national interests regarding supporting its allies, regarding a nuclear program, and regarding ballistic missiles. And that's where Israel will pay most. And that's why I think on the medium and the long term level, we can see a huge difference between how national unity in Iran will be served and how differences inside of Israel, because Israel is a created entity, and it's obvious that we will all people say that we will have differences inside of Israel that will accelerate and increase during a long time. So on the medium term, we have differences on one side and national unity on the other side.
Yeah. And it seems that it will only grow more of an obstacle for the Zionist regime in the region as it really lost this war that it started against the Islamic Republic of Iran. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Hassan Swaidan, a strategic studies researcher and writer for different media platforms and also author to several studies in the field of international relations, for joining us to discuss this issue with us right here on Press TV. Ladies and gents, please stay tuned, because next we will be discussing al-Jolani's Syria seeking normalization. Stay tuned. So recent reports reveal that Syria and Zionist Israel are engaged in direct daily talks aiming toward a historic peace agreement, with discussions of Israeli entity withdrawal from parts of the occupied Golan Heights. At the center of this shift is Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, a former Daesh ISIS commander turned to de facto Syrian leader, whose openness to normalization with Zionist Israel marks a profound betrayal of Syrian sovereignty and the Palestinian cause. More details in the following report. Recent developments in the Levant have revealed a dramatic and unsettling shift in the geopolitical landscape as Syria and Zionist Israel reportedly move towards a historic peace agreement, a move that raises profound questions about loyalty, sovereignty, and the future of regional resistance. Israeli entity media sources citing Syrian insiders have announced that Syria and Zionist Israel are on the verge of signing a peace accord before the end of 2025. Under this agreement, Zionist Israel is expected to gradually withdraw from Syrian territories it occupied following its expansion into the demilitarized buffer zone in December 2024, including the strategic summit of Mount Hermon. However, this ostensible return of land masks a far deeper betrayal. The new de facto Syrian leader, Ahmad al-Shatter, better known by his nom de guerre, Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, is poised to hand over Syria's sovereignty for personal and political gain. Once a commander affiliated with ISIS Daesh and later the head of the extremist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS, al-Jolani was installed through covert operations led by the United States of America and Zionist Israel under the CIA's Operation Timber Sycamore. This campaign, launched in 2011, sought to topple the Assad regime by empowering extremist Takfiri factions. The very groups now control Syria. Al-Jolani's not-so-surprising openness towards Zionist Israel, including his willingness to engage in direct talks and propose a new regional security arrangement based on shared interests, is a stark contradiction to the resistance ethos that once defined Syria's role in the region. Even more telling is his readiness to normalize relations with Zionist Israel and potentially hand over the occupied Golan Heights, a territory deeply contested and symbolic not only for Syrians but for the Palestinian cause he once claimed to champion. Meanwhile, the United States, under President Donald Trump's administration, has actively pushed for Syria's inclusion in the Abraham Accords, hoping to expand a network of normalization deals that prioritize strategic alliances over justice and sovereignty. As White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt emphasized, Washington views this path as essential for long, enduring peace, but critics argue it comes at the cost of abandoning Palestinian rights and regional solidarity. In this complex chessboard of alliances and betrayals, the Syrian people remain the greatest victims, caught between foreign agendas and compromised leadership, their hopes for liberation dimmed by those who trade their homeland for fleeting power. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Sima Itayin, political commentator. It's a pleasure having you with us, Sima, to discuss this issue. Now, given that Ahmad Shara, better known as Abu Mohammad al-Jolani's background as a former Daesh commander and his current role as the de facto Syrian leader, self-appointed president, I like to call him, how do you assess his willingness to normalize relations with Zionist Israel and negotiate over the Golan Heights as if it's land that he owns? What does this really reveal about his political legitimacy and the impact of this foreign-backed extremist factions on Syria's sovereignty and the resistance movements in the region of West Asia?
Thank you so much for having me, Marwa. It's not a surprise. This is someone who's, a former Daesh and al-Qaeda affiliate who was groomed by Western and Turkish intelligence circles and then rebranded as this local Idlib leader. Mm-hmm. And then there was this transformation from local Idlib leader to statesman. So he's no legitimate representative of the Syrian people, as we know. There's nothing surprising about it. It tells us everything we need to know that he's reached here today. His purpose is to serve, geopolitical agendas, and his willingness to negotiate over the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights is not. It fits into a broader pattern of externally imposed leadership, like Sisi in Egypt and Abdullah in Jordan and Abbas in Palestine. So it's his. This is what he actually was brought for.
I do understand that, Sima, but I think we've spoken about this before, the issue of him being so adamant on trying to find an agreement with Zionist Israel as fast as possible. But I mean, come on, the dust hasn't even settled yet in the region. Why is he so adamant on running towards an agreement while Zionist Israel itself is in big trouble?
This is because we have to remember that these are part of the conditions that have been imposed on him if he wants sanctions relief. And he is, what the way he's acting, and I mean what indicators we have is that he has been placed now, he's not neutral, he is directly placed in the Zionist axis. The Turkish Zionist Western Israeli axis. You see, don't forget that he has made it clear that he has no problem with Israel, that he and Israel share the same enemies, Iran being at the top of that list, and this happening so quickly in the wake of Israel's US-backed war on Iran places him, as I said, in that axis. There's no neutrality. So he's been brought for this purpose, to bring Syria into the fold. So this isn't even, I was talking about this yesterday, this isn't even about necessity or survival. Like, sometimes leaders have to compromise because ABC. No, he is a Zionist, actually. He's not just doing this out of necessity. Whether he's a Zionist ideologically or operationally is up for debate. But the point is he fully believes in what he's doing, and he fully believes that Iran Hezbollah, and of course the Assad dynasty are bigger enemies to him and have done more harm to him and his people than Israel. And at the same time, it begs the question, how will this be maneuvered? Because we know that there are a lot of Syrians who are opposed to this.
This is what I want to ask you. What will happen to the Syrian sovereignty and also to the historical resistance factions who have always, since they've always seen Syria as their backbone? What will happen to that?
Well, maybe there'll be some attempt to reframe it. I mean, these resistance can't die, but you will have a reformulation in the region where there's no longer room for this kind of ideology, which is exactly the point of this push. So if we have now what is called Israel's push to complete the Abraham Accords, which is actually called the Abraham Shield Plan, the point of which is to collapse actually any remainder of Arab nationalist support for Palestine. The thing is, there might be an attempt to reframe this in a way that it's just, to keep calm. It's not I don't know, because peace agreements come before normalization. So I don't know how the process would be. It looks like it's very sped up, but how will it be presented? Will it be, because now we have reports that Netanyahu will meet with shatter. I mean, will there be an announcement? The people will stand against this. We've seen all of these loose reports of assassination attempts against Ahmad al-Shatter. We see that there will be fronts opened or groups trying to maneuver around this. But the fact that Syria has now been removed as this, landscape for resistance, as Syria historically has always had this resistance to Zionism, it really, we are all we don't know what's going to happen, but we have to ask, because the point of the Abraham Shield Plan is to, not only take away Syria's sovereignty and make all of Syria a buffer zone, actually, but it's to, restrict the Palestinian cause to just Palestine, to turn it into a domestic issue.
Yeah, this is an issue, because also there are millions of Palestinians who are also living in Syria. How will they see this kind of step taken by the so-called new regime in Syria?
I mean, I think time will show them, because a lot of them, when the regime fell, they felt that this was a good step. And we had Khalid Mish'al of Hamas also celebrating.
He's been celebrating since December 8th, and even before that, even when Zionist Israel was bombing Syria over the past 15 years, somehow some people, even those deeply rooted in the Palestinian cause, were seeing that this was something good for Palestine. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, so the problem is they will have to find new ways to maneuver around this. And
that's going to be tough. They can't really.
They have to first become aware of what they've fallen into, before we can discuss what steps they will take. Because I think up until this point, they've still been holding on to this hope that this has been for the betterment of the Palestinian cause and not to its
God
detriment.
only knows.
I don't know.
But in light of the reported the so-called peace agreement between Syria and Zionist Israel, Sima, how do you really evaluate the risks posed to the Syrian people and the broader resistance front by leadership that appears willing to sacrifice national dignity in Syria and territorial integrity? What should the true path of resistance look like in contrast to this emerging political reality that Ahmad al-Shatter, or better known as Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, is trying to impose on Syria?
Look, all I can say to that is, because I think that we're struggling with this question all over the region, even in Lebanon and everywhere. Right now, this needs to be disrupted, whether this is disrupted through, mobilization, unarmed mobilization or armed mobilization. It doesn't make a difference. The point is to disrupt the norm that they are trying to impose on us. When you have this is, directly playing into the architecture of the new Middle East plan, which they have been working on since the early 2000s. And you and I have both seen that over the years, with all the tragedies that have befallen us, it's never really worked out exactly the way they wanted it to. There has always been some success at thwarting their plans, or minimizing their plans, or taking them off course. And we've seen that thanks to the resistance axis. And now that the resistance axis is, you could say, in jeopardy, especially from the angle of Syria, then that kind of thwarting or disrupting of plans has to come from the people. And I would say this is true to Lebanon just as it is to Syria.
Yeah, because we can debate that if this actually goes through between Syria and Zionist Israel, I think Hezbollah and the resistance in Lebanon in general will find itself in a predicament because it will be encircled and engulfed by Takfiris from one area and by Zionists from the next. Do you think that they will wait for that to actually happen?
No, they will find a way to move, but we don't know exactly what that will look like.
Yeah.
And even if you, before going outside to Lebanon, which you asked a valid question, but I want to stay in Syria, believe it or not, there are a lot of Takfiris on the ground who are convinced that they will fight Israel, and they have no idea that their leadership is completely Zionist. Of course, some of them are Zionists, but there are these fighters on the ground who, once they find out what's actually happening, I mean, really, some of them do. Somehow they're convinced that they will go fight Israel someday, or that how many they are, what percentage of them
in
are
what
like
ways
that.
they think that will happen, given the fact that the new Syrian authorities are willing to even give land to Zionist Israel just to make sure that they stay in power.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's see what happens next. I want to thank you very much, Sima Itani, political commentator, for joining us to discuss this very pressing issue for the entire region, not only for Syria, by the way. Thank you very much, ladies and gents, for watching. Please do follow us on Telegram and on X to get more updates about the region of West Asia right here on Press TV's The Mideast Stream.